Hi everybody, it's Andrew George here from Elixir Consulting. Today I've got Melanie Taylor with us from Scope Legal. Hi Mel, how are you going?
I'm very well, Andrew. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for your time today. We're here to talk about remuneration packages, which has been a hot topic, particularly after the Royal Commission and the FASIA guidelines and so forth. So Mel, let's get straight into it.
So conflicted remuneration is basically a payment, can be monetary payment or a non-monetary payment to an individual who gives advice to retail clients that because of the nature of the payment, it could be reasonably expected, that's the terminology that's used in the legislation, to influence the advice.
Okay.
So that's your basic fundamental position that you need to remember about conflicted remuneration. So what the Commission said was that what you need to be concerned about when you're thinking about paying your staff who give advice is not just what they're doing, but how they're doing it. The Commissioner didn't actually recommend a change to the law necessarily. So the ban on conflicted rem has been in place since 2013. It's actually been there for 7 years. The law hasn't changed. ASIC has had guidance out there about how you can comply for 6 or 7 years. What's happened since the Royal Commission is that there's been a much greater focus on how we go about implementing, making sure that we don't pay conflicted rem at that next layer down from the product issuer. And so I think the Big Four went through a process, probably over about the last 3 years or so, where they started to look at their, the manner in which they pay bonus payments to staff, and thinking about that we foster this culture of sales, and we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that the culture that we foster is one of compliance and customer service, and so that's where the focus is now. That's certainly what ASIC will expect, but I don't expect any actual legal, any change to the law itself. There's be a much greater focus on how you go about structuring those payments to advisors. Look, balanced scorecards is probably the simplest mechanism you can use to make sure that you do comply with ASIC's guidance and with what the Royal Commission has said. And basically they're just a table format with a bunch of measures in them. And you can have a financial metric, but you should also have compliance metrics. It might be a compliance gate, so a hurdle that you actually have to get over before you can then participate in the bonus. You can have a variety of other types of what we would say are non-conflicted measures. So if, for instance, your practice generates fees that are what we call flat dollar fees, so maybe time-based fees, but things that are not volume-based, connected with what your clients are investing, or, an insurance commission, for instance. It does get very complicated. It's not, I've tried to put together some guidance for people that's sort of a bit of a list, but the reality is that no one size fits all. You have to look at the particular circumstances of a particular case to really figure out whether or not you're compliant. So I would say across the board, get some advice from someone who knows what they're talking about. But we come up with these, ideas around what would be acceptable, and it's all about balance. So as long as you're balancing out those sales type metrics or those asset-based fee metrics with some compliance metrics and customer service metrics and what we say are non-conflicted metrics, then you ought to be compliant with the rules.
And we've seen things like net promoter scores, which is more that customer centricity, being a team player in the organisation and so forth. So there's definitely some, there's other avenues that we can put in there. And to be fair, that's not, it's not just about revenue that runs a great business. It's having a compliant culture, customer centric culture. So it really makes sense from a business perspective, doesn't it? That But a balanced scorecard is the change here is actually in line with running a great business.
Absolutely. You're sending you're sending your staff, the right message.
Yep.
By you're saying, this is what we expect of you. And that's a really great way to build a positive culture. Yeah, look, I mean, it all comes down to what are the components that go into making up that bonus. And if all of those components, none of them, contain what we would call conflicted remuneration, which when you go back to those basics is a payment that is intended to influence the advice that the advisor is giving to the clients. Remembering, of course, that volume-based benefits are presumed to be conflicted. So if you look at all of the components that go in and none of them actually are conflicted remuneration, then you can structure your balanced scorecard however you want to.
Yep.
It's only if part of what makes up the pool of money that you're sharing or the manner in which you run your practice actually does contain, conflicted elements such as asset-based fees or, commissions, which as we know are being phased out anyway. It's only then that you need to really, be concerned about how it's structured.